Welcome to this week's free webinar live training for leaders on how to engage millennials. I'm super excited to be talking about a really popular topic. I've frankly been asked a ton about millennials and money. I get asked by our clients who are in the real estate industry, our clients who are in the financial institution field, and just parents, people in general, very interested in learning more about what this next generation thinks about money and how to engage them. So I'm very excited to be joined with Ben. Ben Offit is a rock star in this space. He's got years of experience really not only working with millennials as a millennial, engaging our generation, talking about financial responsibility and financial education and knowledge, but he also has a really great perspective on what leaders of all stripes can really start to do, whether you're a parent or you're a manager, you own a company, you're a trainer, really anywhere in between. So Ben, thanks for jumping on with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So I would love to hear your perspective. What made you interested in the kind of financial area? Was it something that you were taught from a young age? Was there kind of like a light bulb that went off? Because most millennials kind of tend to shy away from this industry, but you've run full towards it and in a really entrepreneurial way.
Definitely. This is not something I anticipated doing out of college. This is not something I always had my hopes set on or my dreams set on. It just kind of fell into my lap. I went to the University of Maryland and I was an entrepreneurship major there and wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do out of college. And I was recruited by a big company out of college. And, a lot of what they, told me appealed to me. So, I was recruited on the notion that, I could help people, I could be entrepreneurial, I could have a lot of freedom and flexibility with my career, my schedule, and all of that really appealed to me. And then that was manifested through the vehicle of starting a financial planning business. So I was called out of the blue, recruited by the business school to this big company, and went in for the interview and really just liked what I heard, and just thought that this is something that actually could suit my personality pretty well. And I decided to run with it. And, here we are 8 years later.
So it was lifestyle first and then kind of the job itself second. Would you say that's kind of right?
No, I would say the biggest thing was the opportunity to help others. I'm very altruistic. I'm very philanthropically motivated. So, the biggest thing for me is I wanted to help people. I didn't know exactly, how I would do that. I was quite interested in, working with different philanthropies and charities through sports. So I was actually looking for a way to combine sports and helping other people. That didn't come to be. So when I learned about, this opportunity, this career, this was a way to help other people, but just through, financial planning and life planning. So, to me, it spoke to me that I can make an impact on people's lives every day and, also use my skill set and, have no, limit on my potential.
So you, of course, have become an expert in this space because of what industry that you've chosen for employment. But why do you think most millennials have a hard time grappling with financial education? I know a big challenge that I hear quite a bit. In another life, I used to write education policy for the state of California. It was really interesting because every single legislative session, we would have a member of the legislature always proposing some new bill saying we need to teach financial education for our students. And there's always a different iteration of that, what counts as financial education, what's enough, what's not enough, et cetera. And I remember being 21, 22 years old thinking, wow, what a difference that would have made for myself as a public school student in California. But where do you see kind of the holes in how millennials have come to terms and come to an understanding of what their money means to them?
I would say I think a lot of people don't have a good understanding of money. I think it's not quite as strong as it probably should be. And I think that, it's a deficit in our society and our structure. And I think that, that's where someone like me comes in. I think that's why there's a need for someone that really truly, does what I do. Going back to what we were just talking about a moment ago, I didn't take any financial planning courses in college, nor in high school or, anything before that. I wish that I had, but I learned it, as I, became a professional in this career. So, I'd imagine for a lot of other people, they're feeling the same thing. It's just that they, didn't become a professional at it and thus haven't really learned it. And, they came out of school with, little to no understanding of, financial planning, and that continues. And then therefore, it's like they're flying a plane, without knowing how to fly. And, I think the problem is they don't truly have a great education around it. And, they're not really sure what to do. So I think there's a deficit. I think that's where we come in.
So what are some of the core tenets? I think that the idea of financial education and even having a strong financial foundation can seem really large and somewhat daunting for many millennials. What are some of the key tenets that you think that someone who's young, maybe in their 20s, that they should really have a firm understanding of before they're making those big next steps? That could be, whether it's an understanding about debt, credit score. I don't want to answer for you, but I'd love to hear, your professional expert opinion about what people should have a good understanding on to say, yeah, I'm financially aware.
Yeah, I think the first thing is cash flow, in my opinion. I think that's kind of the starting point of all success or failure financially. So if the cash flow is not structured, if it's not in alignment, then that can create a lot of problems that bleeds over into really everything that you're doing. So, I would, say that's really the first and most important piece is cash flow. That's kind of like, the engine that drives the whole train. If you've got good cash flow, that allows you to save money and, put yourself in a position of, success, and, allows you to achieve great things and, have the things that you want in your life and have, peace of mind and freedom and flexibility. If you have bad cash flow, that often results in, low savings and credit card debt. And, that creates a lot of problems for people and a lot of stress. So I think, that's the first and most important thing is, how do you figure out, how much to live off of, based on what you make, how much to save, how much to spend, how do you structure that? And I think there's no, discipline there that people are taught. And so if people aren't taught that, then they get into bad situations, which are difficult to get out of. I come across people that, have a lot of credit card debt, and, on top of that, they have student loans, and, they're growing up and they want to, buy a house and have a family. And it's, if they've got years of accrued compounding in a negative way, it's hard to get out of that situation. So if they can get in the right situation immediately, that puts them in a position of leverage.
Yeah, making more money certainly, I think, helps everyone really, no matter what position of life that you're in. You're going to have more freedom, more flexibility, I think more perspective. And I think that that's really what you're coming at. But one of the biggest challenges for young people is that they do move from job to job to job so quickly. Of course, what we spend a lot of our time doing working with companies and clients is helping them reach and retain the next generation, because we've recognized that you and I both live in the Washington, D.C. area. The average millennial stays about 11 months at their job. So it's a huge price tag attached to each of these individuals. And so this idea of having predictable income is a whole other level. So what does that look like for a generation that's moving at a faster rate than maybe others have in the past?
I think, a lot of people say that about our generation, that millennials don't stick around at jobs very long, maybe, 18 months, 24 months, something like that. And then they move on. And I think, probably, one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons that occurs is, they might be offered a higher salary, elsewhere. and maybe that's a raise. And they say, well, this is a form of, job growth for me and salary growth. And I'm also bored of, what I'm doing right now anyway, so I can change and do something better. But, I think that can also reset, people's careers in different ways. The mobility is not allowing them to get, true experience and, true, knowledge in exactly what they're doing. And while they might be getting a $5,000 raise or a $10,000 raise, maybe they're not truly an expert in what they're doing. So I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but maybe restate it again.
Well, I don't know if there's a clean answer. And I think that's part of it is, anecdotally, I think it certainly makes sense that if you're moving from job to job every 2 years, the idea of saving or even making life's big purchases, millennials are taking an average of 7 years longer to get married and have kids and buy a house. Kind of those core tenets of what makes someone an adult.
Sure.
And because of that, I think that the ripple effect is not only interesting to someone who studies our generation for a living, but as someone who works with industry leaders to kind of either counteract or prepare for this big flow. What are the main industries that you see really being affected either positively or negatively from the millennials' poor understanding of their finances?
That's a good question. Well, I think that it seems to me like everything is moving towards like a renting culture.
Yeah, definitely.
More so than an ownership culture. So, if you look at, very popular platforms like, Spotify or Netflix or Uber, or even just, home ownership, it seems like more people are renting. So, our generation seems to be interested in, having what they want immediately and not, owning it, not paying the full price for it. So I would say industries that, are counting on people buying things in ownership capacity are hurting, but that's already happened, in forms of, cabs and taxis and, movie theaters and, places like Blockbuster and, or buying, DVDs or, buying CDs or albums, or home ownership, in the DC area, probably most millennials are renting instead of owning. It's just unaffordable to buy. So, I think those are the industries probably being hit the most, and we'll see, how that changes over time. But I don't look at it as a negative thing. It's just that, societies evolve and change, and, people adapt, and, everything changes over time. And that's, new companies and new technologies and new things will emerge as a result of that. And that's, that's just the way it goes.
Yeah, you started to list a few industries that have already really started to feel the pains of it. Real estate has been really impacted by this millennial value system. And that's what it is it's a value system that millennials don't necessarily want or need to own things, whether that's owning a vehicle or owning a vacation property or owning a home. And statistically, we're not necessarily seeing that change as millennials come of age, whether that's, as we enter into our early 30s, or now millennials are 35 and 36. So as we're getting older, we're actually not seeing that change significantly. Of course, it's going to depend on the market. You mentioned Washington, D.C. Price, of course, plays a factor in everyone's decision whether or not to move into the real estate space. But it's really hard to counteract, even with a low price point, this kind of wanderlust principle and value system that millennials have. And it's not that millennials are irresponsible and don't want to own anything. But what we see when we're asking millennials, what of these, core tenets is most interesting and most appealing to you, rather than kind of the traditional, owning a home, establishing yourself, having kind of a steady pace of life, that's being swapped out for more experience-based and more freedom and flexibility. And that's certainly seen in the workforce quite a bit, as flexibility is a huge priority for millennials. But we're just seeing that more, that millennials are looking at being able to move around rather than having that one location.
Sure.
And of course, that was pretty typical of other generations in their 20s, but millennials are extending it 5 to 10 years longer. And I'm sure even within your own industry in financial planning, how are you seeing millennials approach your industry? Is that something that they're even aware what a financial planner does? How do they react to you when you talk about how you can help our generation be better with their money?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I mean, I think some of that is, financially oriented, and some of that is, just society in general. But I think student loans have a big thing to do with all of this. It's kind of a trickle down effect.
Absolutely.
So, college is, skyrocketed in price, and that has created a deficit in affordability, and that shifts the responsibility to, millennials to take out student loans. And then that cripples their finances out of college because they're spending tons of money for a long time paying down student loans. So that gets them behind. And then therefore, maybe they don't have as much disposable income to go buy a house or, start a family because they feel strapped, financially. So that's an interesting aspect. But, with what I do, I think that most millennials feel that, or there's a preconceived notion that I only work with people that, have a lot of money invested that's liquid for me to manage, and that my job is, solely to, create a portfolio for people that have, $300,000 and above of investable assets. And, most millennials are saying, well, that's not me. I'm not there yet. So, talk to me in, 20 years, but, the truth is that I do a lot more than that. And, I especially try to help, people who are my age or my demographic, because I think that, we need the help, and, someone needs to provide it. And I think that people would be in a better situation if they had true guidance and true support, from someone like myself who understands what they're going through and can, help them in ways beyond just portfolio management. But like I said, talking about cash flow, we're talking about debt management, we're talking about student loans, we're talking about, how do you, get the right mortgage, or how do you find the right house that's affordable for you, or how do you insure properly, or how do you take advantage of, the employee benefits available at your job, or the retirement plan, or, whatever it is. And, a lot of that doesn't pertain to the size of your portfolio. So I think, it's a misconceived, notion that financial planners or financial advisors only invest money. And I think my industry is going through a revolution right now, and that's changing a lot. I think the problem with my industry is that it's a very broad term. So the term financial advisor is very broad. If you think about, the term lawyer or attorney, there's many different kinds of lawyers and attorneys. An estate planning attorney wouldn't be able to represent a criminal in court very well, and vice versa. So I think the problem with my industry is that most people assume that all advisors do exactly the same thing. And I think that that's not true. So.
No, that makes so much sense. Now, for people who are on, because I know there are people who are parents, there are people who manage their own companies. What are some really practical ways that they can start to talk to millennials about their finances? Maybe some questions that they can start to ask that isn't going to sound invasive or leading, but maybe some accountability questions, or helping those in their lives that they maybe mentor or lead start to think differently about how they're managing their money.
Yeah, I mean, I would just ask them, how are you doing? And that's what I do in, my meetings with people. And that's part of my process is, just asking people how they're doing. And I think once you have an open-ended question like that, it allows them to open up and say what's going on. So I think if you have that question, they might say, well, I'm in debt, or I'm not saving, or I feel stressed about this, or I'm concerned about this.
I have a really hard time thinking that if I were to ask one of my friends, hey, how are you doing? They would say, yeah, I'm not saving. And that's not only kind of anecdotal of my relationships, but and we've seen that. I've done surveys and focus groups for financial institutions. And it took a period of time for us to build a relationship. And so maybe you have that with either your clients or your friends, for them to say, yeah, I'm $50,000 in student loan debt, and, I've got $20,000 in consumer debt. I don't know what to do.
Right.
And it seems, this is with anyone, right? No one wants to, wave a flag and say, hey, I'm not great with my money. Can you help me? And so that's kind of what I want to get to. How do you ask questions that are going to cause people to say, hey, maybe I can learn something from you, some perspective, et cetera. Because I think that's really, where some of the power can come from, whether, again, you're a parent or you're a manager.
Yeah, you're totally right. It's not a comfortable topic. It's not something that people enjoy, talking about over cocktails or dinner out together.
Which is crazy, because money and it's funny, because I think that millennials may be a different generation in that regard, because I do see our generation being more open to talking about things like salary and things like debt, which other generations considered taboo, where you didn't talk about those things. I think because our generation is more open and authentic, I don't think that we have as much of a problem or a challenge talking about it. But I think and I could be wrong, I'd love to hear your perspective, but I think part of it is when people are bad with their money, it's a value. It's almost like they don't, either they're not a responsible person, or, they're not in charge of their life. There's a value that's projected on them, either by society or by themselves. And I think that's probably why money is such an awkward topic for all of us to talk about, rather than what it really is, which is just a transaction and a dollar amount.
You're right. I think, it reveals a lot about, right or wrong, that person. It's almost like, going to the doctor, and you have to get undressed, and it's kind of uncomfortable to do that a little bit, but you're going to see the doctor and you have to do it, and it's for your own good. But getting fully undressed in front of your friend is pretty awkward to do. So it's definitely very personal, people's relationship with money, and the emotions tied to that, and kind of what's going on under the hood. Maybe some people are open about it, but they might be more open about it at a surface level or a cursory level, where they might say something like, man, I'm so tired of paying these student loans, or what's talking about the market is going to go down, or they might say something surface level, but it's not truly getting deep into what's really going on with them.
Totally. Absolutely.
And I don't think that it's necessarily my friend's job or someone else's job to comment on that, because what's going on with them is very personal. But they might say something like, well, maybe you'd want to talk to somebody about that, or explore that further, because that could be for your own benefit. I was just talking to somebody earlier today, and he was telling me about his wife, who is having a bout with anxiety, and how she's dealing with that. And for me, I can't get too deep into that, but I could say, well, it's great, that she's getting professional help, and that'll really help, her and, your guys' situation, but beyond that, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist. I can't, dive too deep into that, but I can say something like, well, it's great that she's getting help. And so, I think for someone with financial planning, and, if people recognize that there's some stress or pain points or opportunities, and, maybe say, we might want to talk to somebody about that.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. And I appreciate you not trying to diagnose people, because I think we've all met people in our lives who are like, I know exactly what that person needs. And you're like, right. You look that up on WebMD. There's no way that you actually know what you're talking about in that regard. Right. But one of the reasons that we first connected, Ben, was just this conversation about what companies can do to educate their millennial employees. And I think that it's a really powerful concept, that I don't see companies doing enough of. And when we do analyses for companies, as we're talking about next steps for them, this idea of training development is always the number one solution that we come up with. It's usually the number one request that their employees have. And yet so many companies say that they're doing it, but they're not addressing the real need. And what we've asked young people, new and young employees, is what kind of information, what training do you want? Financial education is always top of the list. And so many companies I talk to, their leadership, they're like, well, it's not my responsibility to teach them. So how can companies start to provide training? What does that look like? What kind of structure, what kind of topics can and should companies start to teach their new and young employees to make sure that they're not only retaining them, right? Because so that the young people are excited about what they're starting to understand personally, but also to a loyalty factor to their company. So what should companies do?
Yeah. I think you're exactly right. I think that companies view, their responsibility is, you come here, you do a job, and we pay you a salary, and what you do with that salary is up to you. It's not our responsibility. So we've done our job. We've paid you. Go do what you want, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think that there are some more benefits that have become more available through employers. Like health insurance or life insurance or disability insurance. Maybe maybe some retirement plan options. Some companies actually have employee assistance programs, which is like, you have the opportunity to call a counselor or get some free therapy sessions if you need something like that. But, there's no real, definitive, financial planning benefit or financial wellness benefit. I think that's starting to emerge more and more so as companies realize that, their employees would be happier and have more satisfaction and have a longer tenure with the company if they got support and guidance, not just around a 3% salary raise, but something that can actually make a meaningful difference in their life, such as financial planning. Somebody that can teach them how to save, how to have discipline with money, how to put the puzzle pieces together, and that's not quantified through a product. That's not a health insurance plan. That's not a mutual fund. That's a relationship. That's education, and that's something different. So, I think there's some companies out there that are starting to provide benefits like that. But I think essentially how it can work is you have an advisor, like myself. You pay them, you hire them. It's not a cost to the employee, and then that advisor can come in and provide workshops or educational events around different subject matters, and also potentially do some one-on-one with the employees, and that raises their financial awareness and their confidence in themselves and their peace of mind and their self-esteem around what they're doing, and helps them have more clarity around what they're doing. And I think that has real possibility and power to it. I also think companies could think about something like a student loan match as opposed to a retirement match. So something like, an employee that has, 50 to 100 to 150,000, et cetera, of student loan debt. Well, maybe they'd like, a match of 3% to help them pay down their student loans faster, as opposed to, a 3% contribution into their 401k plan. That could be more beneficial potentially. So, there's other things.
I totally agree. The student match program is something I've been a really big fan of for the last few years, as it's slowly starting to get more acceptance widespread. I think that there's a hesitation by many companies to do it. I think one of the probably most obvious reasons is that, versus a 401k, it's not tax deductible. It's not pre-tax. So I think that there's kind of a lack of incentive for many companies who would like to do that. But companies like PwC are doing it. They're seeing incredible results from it. And I couldn't agree more. Financial education doesn't just have to be what you think is important. It's not shoving your benefits program or your 401k plan. Right. It's listening to your employees, understanding what makes sense for them, and creating a system that's not only customizable, but the way that I see it and the way I explain it is really conversation between you and your employees, learning about what their needs are, because the need of a 22-year employee is of course going to be different than someone who's 62. And you have to be amenable to that. I think most organizations get that kind of general principle, but we're not seeing it really put into action. What kind of resources? I think wellness has been a really big topic, a part of kind of an overall health push within corporate America. But that wellness isn't just your BMI. I think it also has to do with your financial wellness as well. Is if you can help your employees make better decisions with their money, pay off student loans. I think you made a really great point with that. Start to save for the future. If you can help those who you employ make those kinds of decisions, I think you're not only going to see higher levels of loyalty, but I think that you're going to see greater levels of trust and overall productivity as well. I think it makes sense, don't you?
No doubt. Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that would probably shift the demographic data of millennials changing jobs every 18 months, 24 months, something like that. If they knew that they had a benefit that their employer was providing for them and truly looking out for their best interests, something that they have exposure to at their job, I think that has a huge rate of return value for the employee beyond just salary compensation.
Yeah, you bet. Well, I want to make sure to open it up to questions for those who are on here with us live. If you have an actual, as opposed to an unactual question, a very specific question that you want to ask myself or Ben, it could be about financial planning, specific challenges, or maybe a situation that you'd like us to talk about. Make sure that you type it in. We've got a few minutes left here for questions. As we wait for those questions to come in, Ben, what is maybe the most effective technique that you found to getting millennials on a wise either saving or kind of spending path? So say, someone is, a millennial in their 20s or early 30s, comes to you and says, hey, I've made these mistakes in the past. What are kind of some next steps that you would take with them?
I'm sorry, you said that they're on a what? What are the next steps?
To help them get on a wise financial path. So talking about saving and spending, what are some next steps you would take with them?
Well, this is really not meant to be a plug for myself, but I do really believe that there's a lot of value in having an advisor. And the reason I say that is I think that it's more than just advice. It's about behavioral change. It's about accountability. It's about having someone that's looking out for you. And I think a lot of times, things don't necessarily get done or get moved forward in a positive direction without someone like myself, there, to help them. There's a reason, Alcoholics Anonymous is successful because of support groups. It's because people have an infrastructure, they have a setting where they can come to and talk about it. They have, someone that helps guide the conversations, keeps them accountable. And that's really part of my role, and I just feel like it's easy to put it on paper or say it, but to actually get it done, I think, having an advisor that really is helping you and pushing you in the right direction to do what you need to do, I think is huge. I think, tactically in terms of cash flow, I think, it's not just about making more money. It's about living within your money and making it work for you. So, a lot of times what I'll do with people is help them identify their expenses in different categories based on fixed expenses, which are expenses that are recurring and are the same amount every single month, like your rent or your mortgage or your student loan payment or your car payment or whatever it is. And we identify what those are, and we identify what their variable expenses are, which might change from week to week, how much they go out to eat or going to a bar or how much they're shopping or going on Amazon or whatever it is. Those expenses change week to week. And that's often the area that I find is the sweet spot. that's where all the magic happens, because people don't realize, how much or what or where they're spending in those categories. And that's what eats up all of their money that can then be used for what I call future expenses. So, putting money away for retirement in the future, or putting money away for buying a house in the future, or, for this great trip they want to take in the future. So if they're spending all of their money in the present, then there's not much money left over for the future. So everyone has finite resources. No one has infinite resources. And it's just about, how do I divide and how do I splice up my dollar as efficiently as I possibly can, so I can enjoy my life how I want to. But what happens is that if people it's like a balloon. If people are spending all of their money in the present, week to week stuff, then that squeezes the balloon at one end, and then they don't have room for the other. So I think if people can identify those things and recognize, spending patterns, and try to put some accountability and infrastructure and discipline around that, that actually can create a lot of freedom, which is interesting.
That's incredible advice. And I think making it as relatable and specific as possible. And I know, Amazon Prime, it's one of those things that you're just like, it's way too easy, right? It's too easy to do the one click, and that's why they do it. But you're right. It's how do you take control of your finances? How do you have an honest discussion about it? And how do you, particularly for a generation that is so young and has so much ahead of us, I'm sure. I loved how you opened up about you got into this industry because you like helping people, and you're committed to helping people create a better lives for themselves and for their communities, for their families, et cetera.
Right.
And you're certainly doing that. So I don't see any questions coming through, which is totally fine. So we're just gonna go ahead and close it out. Ben, did you have any last thoughts? Any way that we can get in touch with you? I'll make sure to link below more information about you and how to get in touch with you in everything that you do.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I don't think I have anything else to say. If you want to, get in touch with me, our website is clearpathadvisory.com. And, any questions, feel free to give me a call or email or whatever.
Awesome. And as always, we love having our weekly webinar talking about specific tools and tricks and tips, how to engage with the next generation. So I'm Gabrielle Bosché. It's been a huge pleasure to have Ben on, and we look forward to seeing you on our future webinars. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.